Recording, yes. Okay, today is July 3rd, 2018. This is the regularly scheduled lecture for ITSC 2309 at Collin College, although I'm not at Collin College. Um, let's see, I have graded test one, was not real happy with the grades, but the tests are graded. The way that tests will typically work is people will tend to spread widely. They'll have a group of fairly high grades and a group of very, very low grades, and not very many in the area between them. So the cutoff I would call on passing grade on this test would be a 60 or so, right around there. Then there's a big jump down to a few more. So if you're down in the 20s and 30s, look out. It's time to start coming to, by coming to class, I mean attending this class, attending to the lectures. I can look at the lectures and see that very few people are really going. So I'm going to start insisting that you either come to the lecture or view the lecture. And to that, I'm going to give you a keyword. I think I'll start doing that. I think I'll start telling you the keyword in here, and then you make a note of the keyword, and then you have to send that back to me in a message that you have actually read, you've actually watched the lecture. Okay, so there's the test. Now at the bottom of it, I've attached the demo file. So there's a to this note, to this announcement, there's a reply, and down here is the demo file that I'm going to use today. And so enough of that. I guess I will use the modules. I'm going to go back. I've been pretty sick the past week due to the fact I caught a summer upper respiratory infection turned into a almost pneumonia anyway, so I was hospitalized for a little while. And I wasn't doing very well the last time that we met, and we talked about data aggregation. So I was just kind of trying to keep my head up and get through it, so I'm doing much better now. Let's look at this data aggregation again. 7. Now, chapter 7 is module 7 is not a difficult one for students. It's pretty easy for the most part. And I give you a little lecture here from one of my contemporaries, Dr. King, and we're going to look at 5 of the aggregate functions. So count, the sum, the min, the max, and the AVG, or average. There are others. I think there are about 23 of them or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but these are the big 5. These 5 will be in all of the textbooks, and so they typically work with them, and those are the ones you really use the most. There's for those of you who are into statistics, there's standard deviation and variance and all of that stuff that you can use. You can it'll do quite a bit for you, but these, if you understand these and you know what a standard deviation is, then you can understand how to do it. There are 5 that we look at, and what they do is they take several values and collapse these into one value. Pretty simple. So a count gives me just, when I talk about the count, that says how many of them are there. So for example, if I said select count of invoice ID as my count, now we should always have a, we should always name the column. So if I were to come over and just copy this, and not sure what I've got here, but I'll just use it for his. So paste them in there, select count of invoice ID. How many invoices do I have in there? If I execute that, should probably use and log in as SW Smith, connect. And I have 113 invoices, I find out. So I counted the invoice IDs. I'm going to come back to that bit about count what here in just a minute. So count the invoice ID. Since the invoice ID is the primary key, the count of the unique invoice IDs will be the same as the count of the records. So whenever that's your objective, when your objective is, my objective is to count records. Just count records. I don't care about counting the invoice ID. And I believe the example I used was if I told you to take a head count, how many, take a head count in the room. Oh, I don't really care about your head. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, I assume everybody in the room has a head and only one of them. Therefore, but counting your head should be the same as counting the rest of your body. But if your objective is to do that, you can save your system some trouble because your system doesn't know that. Your system has no way of knowing that you don't care about the particular invoice ID. So the way that you should say this when your objective is just simply to count the records, count any darn thing as my count from invoices. So if there is a record there, count it. Now you don't have to go into the record and look for the invoice ID and make sure it's there. So this will return exactly the same number of 113 as the counting the primary key. We entered the, let's see. There's also count all and count distinct. If I say it is usually count all, if I just say count, let me see an example here. What if I wanted to count vendor ID? Oh, let me back out of that. Let's copy this. Let's count the vendor ID. So the vendor ID, you will recall, is a foreign key over in the invoices table. The vendor ID takes me to the vendors table. Now, if I do this, I will see how many vendor IDs do I have. And so I can look at that and I can say, oh, look, I have 113 records. I have 113 vendor IDs. And that tells me that I don't have any orphans in that table. I could find the orphans by just saying select invoice ID where vendor ID is null. That would show me any orphans. That would actually be a better way to find them. But this tells me if it's the same, the record count and the vendor ID count are the same, then I don't have any empty vendor IDs.
Question.
Go ahead.
Whatever you were counting and the table that is open, like vendor ID and invoices. So
Very well.
That column, that field has to be in that table, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, you cannot use this count.
No, you cannot count vendor ID. I mean, for example, if I were to try to count terms ID, for example, or something like that,
Okay.
I don't have that in the invoices table. So I would have to either join them or something. I have to get it in the table. I know that I have a vendor ID in the invoices table.
Okay. Now, if we said from invoices, comma, terms table and count terms ID, will I be able to?
Yes, we would not do comma though, but what we would say is inner join, because comma.
I was doing implicit way.
Yes, I'm getting away from even teaching the implicit, although I learned joining on the implicit join first. So I'm the implicit join kid, but we are going to use the explicit join because that's where the industry's moving.
Okay, so now I can count terms ID then?
Yes, you would be able to until you need the on in there. So you let's see, what is the I believe it's the what takes me to the terms table from the invoices.
Do I have to use an on condition there?
Yeah, you need an on, and what I always do is I come over and look. So the terms ID, I come over here and look at the invoices table, and the terms ID takes me to the terms table. So I would have to put the on condition in here.
So without that on condition, it will not count.
You're going to get it. It won't be it won't be a join. So you have to have the on.
Okay.
As terms on I dot and now we would be able to, now we should be able to count the terms ID.
So anything that you put on that on condition, that's the only thing you can count, is that?
Well, the on condition is what joins the two tables. So this is a table join. Let's see what's.
Okay, look at another field from terms ID and see if we can get a count on that.
I'm sorry, what other field did you have in mind?
I don't know all the column names in the terms table.
So something from the terms table? You can count anything from the terms table.
At this time, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So this would tell us when we did this inner join, I think we're going to come back with 113, I expect, 112. So somebody in there doesn't have I think there's one invalid terms ID in there that I put in there just to find something. So there's something that's invalid because I'm seeing 112 there. And I believe I did put an invalid one in there. So when you start seeing the counts that don't match, and they should, wait a minute, I think we're going to find that there is an invalid terms ID in the invoices table. And if you, I think I had you find that. Okay. So let's go back to this one. We're going to count the vendor ID. Vendor ID from invoices, and that'll be enough. So we're just counting the vendor IDs, and we get back 113. Now let's count. There are two options here, and this is talked about here on this page. So it says you can say count distinct or count all. And the distinct and the all goes inside of this guy. So count all. Count all vendor IDs. And the other option is count distinct vendor IDs.
But all these three will give you the same result.
No, they won't. The count all is the default. So if I execute count all, these two are the same result. The one on line 10 and the one on line 14 are the same result. So just count means count all. If I use the count distinct, it's a little bit different because that gives me 33. And this tells me that there are 33 distinct vendor IDs. So it means I've got a lot of duplication in there. So if I were to go look at the vendor IDs in the invoices table, I would expect to find lots of duplication.
But if you do the vendors table, then there will be no difference.
That's true. The vendors table, because the vendor ID and the vendors table is the primary key. Okay. So I don't really need to fool with saying count distinct there. Okay. They're guaranteed to be distinct. But I could say it. It wouldn't hurt anything. So the count, what matters whether you say distinct or all. Some textbooks want to try to make you say either distinct or all the time, kind of like I do with where I force you to say inner join and outer join, and people will just resist. And I'm still sending back papers and saying, no, put outer join in there. And then they'd send me the paper back again without it, it's saying left join and right join. And I send the pay up. I keep sending the paper back until they fix it. But some books want you to put the distinct or the all in there. I don't think it's important if you just want the count, but it is important that if you're just wanting to count the records, just say count asterisk instead of saying count invoice ID. I'm guaranteed that these two will be the same because invoice ID is the primary key. They have to be the same. But there's no point in making it go look for the invoice ID when we can just say, oh, count the record. Questions? Excuse me.
Yes. Well,
still fighting a cough.
I can see that. I'm glad you're back and feeling better.
Much better, thank you.
Okay. What I was saying, when I was trying to code something, you cannot put count, like my count here, as a group item, group by, right?
About to come to a group by. I guess group by is our next thing. I mean, I know I've covered it once, but basically I'm just covering what is a count first.
Okay.
So let me just cover that quickly. I've got a demo file set up here, and this is a terrible table. I just have test values. Create table, test values. I've got some values in there, A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, and D. Notice that there is no primary key, but I don't care. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm supposed to care about things like that, but in this case, I'm just trying to get a quick and dirty table together. Insert some values into it. Notice I'm not inserting anything into this D. He's going to be null, all nulls. And so I insert 1, 1, 1, and some stuff, 101 and 122 and one null 3. And so a couple of nulls in that second column, a couple of zeros. Now notice the A has all of its values there. So if I select, let's see, I need to use my correct database. You always have to go up there and execute that thing to set your database. And now, as long as you stay with this table, you don't have to execute it over and over again. You can just go down here and execute. But you do have to go up and execute the use command once. There's no, this really should have, after the create, I really should have a go here, and I really should have a go here. Okay, so I'm going to count A. What am I expecting to see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 values in the A column, and when I execute this, I do in fact see 5. You can see it down there. If I count B, what do I expect to see? Well, in the B column, I have 0, 2, null, 4, null. And I'm not going to count null values. They're just not going to count. So if I say count B, I get a count of 3. If I were to try to count how many things are in D, so let's try to count the D. Remember D, that it never had any values put into it. Therefore, it's all nulls. So when I try to count them in there, what do I get? I get, I was expecting to see a null there. Notice I got 0.
Professor Smith, just one thing. Can you shift your screen a little bit to your right so that I can see the left corner, what's coming out of those?
Shift to the right?
Yeah. I'm not able to see your screen, the result that shows the output.
Oh, down here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I can try. Well, that didn't help, did it? We'll try this one.
because it's cutting off the left edge.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. That's the difference.
Okay, well, we can use that then. I suspect that has to do with Zoom more than in either of our computers. But if that gets me, if I center it up on the page, and that helps it. So when I count D, now I was expecting this to return null. If I try, I know that if I tried to average, or if I tried to take the sum, how many of them are there? Well, 0 there would make sense. But if I tried to sum it up, and I say add them all up, I'm going to get null, because I can't. If I add up nothing plus nothing plus nothing isn't 0. Okay, I can take the average of B, going back here and looking at this. So the B is 0, 2, 4. I have 1, 2, 3 values. They add up to 6. I expect the average to be 2. Do you think?
What?
Well, if I take the average of the numbers in the second column here, 0 plus 2 plus 4, they add up to 6. I have divide by 3. I expect to see 2. And so, in fact, I will, when I average the B column, I will see 2. Count, if I try to average D, it's going to show me null, because I can't take an average of nothing. I have to divide by 0.
Okay.
And then how many rows? We talked about that. Okay, questions on these guys? I have, there's 5 of them, and the big 5 that we're going to have are these, the sum, push this down, sum, count, the sum, the minimum, the maximum, the AVG. So the minimum, maximum, and average are, well, count, sum, and average are numbers. They only work on numbers. If you try to take the, count does not. Count works on anything. Sum and average work on numbers. If you try to take the average of a list of names, it's going to return null. It only averages numbers that are in the range. If you have something else in there that's not a number, well, it won't work. Count will count anything. I can count text fields. It counts anything that's not null. The minimum and the maximum work on names and texts and dates and anything. So if you apply it to dates, the latest date or the earliest date will come back.
Minimum will also work on numbers too, right?
Yeah, minimum and maximum work on numbers. They work on anything that it makes sense to compare. Okay. Now let's see. With this one, I'm going to go into group by. The group by. Okay, you trigger the group by. Notice that I have a count. I have an aggregate function. So the new rule is I have an aggregate function, and this is in the module too, fairly strongly. If I have an aggregate function, there I have 1. I might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. It doesn't matter. I have at least 1. And I have a field that is not an aggregate function. There's one of them, A. That tells me that A must appear in the group by.
Okay.
Let that sink in. This is a rule, hard and fast, and it doesn't matter what database you're working in. This will be the case. That works this way in Access, and when students are trying to take Access, it looks a little stranger there because of the way they do it in the graphical user interface. They still have the group by. The rule still applies. Do you have an aggregate function? I do have an aggregate function. It's right there, count. Do I have something that is not an aggregate function? Yes, I do. Right there, it's A. In that case, I must group by the thing that is not aggregated, the thing that's not in the aggregate. I must group by A. What
if there was a B? Select A and B.
Then A and B would both have to be in the group by.
Okay.
So if I try to execute this without the group by, I'm going to get a red level test files A is invalid in the select list because it is not contained in either an aggregate function or the group by clause. Very clear. Has to be in A is not an aggregate. Here is an aggregate. A is not an aggregate. Therefore, A has to be in the group by. Let's see what happens when I run that. Notice what I got. Can you see that output okay, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. For the A value 1, I have 3 values. Where A is valued 2, I have 2 values. Is that so? For 1, excuse me, 1, I have three values. I have 3 rows. Where A is 2, I have 2 rows. So what that does, and I could have done average, so I could have said average of B, but as soon as I put that A and B there, now I don't want to put A comma B here because that would confuse things a little bit. I just want to stick with the 1 right now. What happened there? Every place that A was the same got collapsed into one group, hence the term group by. So when A was 1, that was one group and it counted everything there. When A was 2, that was a different group and it counted everything there. Pausing, let that sink in.
Yeah, I didn't get it.
Mr. Kasuka, do you have audio? Okay. Mr. Kasuka, if you have a question, I can see my my Canvas messages. So if you type the Canvas message, I would get it right away. Let's see. So that's group by. So select A, my count from test files, group by A. Now, suppose I were to do something like this. Let's look at, so let's select count. Let's see, vendor ID from invoices. Count. Oh, let's look at vendor city. And let's see how many now I've triggered the rule. See the rule triggered right here. I have an aggregate function and I really always should. It's always good practice to name a field that you give. If it doesn't have a name, give it one. And so I've triggered the rule. I have an aggregate function, and I have something that is not an aggregate function. Everything that is not an aggregate function must go into the group by. Vendor city. And this will be fine. I'm not real excited about, well, I'll just run it right quick to see the output. Notice that I have 2 from Anaheim, 3 from Boston, 2 from Chicago, 2 from Cincinnati. Look at that, I got a whole bunch of them from Fresno. One from Los Angeles. Now, suppose that I had a vendor. Let me go in here and I'm going to put a vendor in here just for the heck of it. I'm going to open, and this is legal. If you want to do this, you may. Just bear in mind you are changing your data. I'm going to go into my vendors. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say edit top 200 rows. Okay, this Pooh guy, he lives in Frisco, Texas. Let's change him to San Diego, Texas. You do know that there is a San Diego, Texas, right? And if you edit the top 200 rows of a table and you change those data, it does change the data, by the way. Just bear that in mind. And if you want to get them back, it's fairly easy. All you have to do is run that create AP script again. Now let's go run this query one more time. What did I do with my query? Did I close him? I guess I closed him someplace. Okay. Well, okay, new query. Use AP. Always start with that guy, or whatever database you're using. And what I'm going to select vendor city. Comma count. And I'm going to use the count asterisk because I don't care. I could count the vendor IDs, but I don't really care about vendor IDs. I just want to know how many records there are. Give it some kind of a name from vendors. And because I have triggered this this new rule, I now have to have the group by vendor city. Now again, I cannot use an alias, so I can't say select vendor city as V and then say group by V. It won't let me do that. It will let me do order by on it. So as soon as I do this, I get. Let's see. I guess I better execute the whole thing. Notice I'm still Boston is 3. Still got a whole bunch for Fresno, wherever that was. Where were you, Fresno? Overland, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, Fresno. What? There, 41 for Fresno. And now let's go down to San Diego. Let's look at San Diego. San Diego has 2. Now, what's this mean? It means that there's 2 that live in the city of San Diego, but we have a San Diego, California, and we have a San Diego, Texas. That's my point, where I was trying to get with this. So it's saying I've got 2 San Diegos. It does not differentiate between San Diego, Texas, and San Diego, California. So in order to break those out, I would have to add into this the vendor state. And then since I have this one, if I tried to execute this, I'm going to get an error as soon as it sees vendor state is invalid because he's not in the group by. So everything that is up here, everything in this on this line that is not in an aggregate must be in the group by. If I tried to execute this, I'm going to get for my reading pleasure an error message that says vendor state is invalid. So he goes into the group by. Okay. And now I think if we execute this, we're going to get something. And I still got the same sort of thing because most of the time the cities are unique. But as we get down here to San Diego, I find there's San Diego, California noted, and there's one in San Diego, California. And then I come down to the bottom, and here's a San Diego, Texas. Therefore, when I put the vendor city, just the vendor city, each group is grouped by the city. It doesn't care if you live in San Diego, San Diego, Texas, San Diego, California are all the same. Once you add in the state, now it becomes vendor city and vendor state have to match. So for example, if I'm grouping by last name, everybody named Smith is going to end up in the same group. When I say group by first name, comma, last name, then they'll be different. Questions?
So we can have, so now I understand a little bit, count any two items, any two columns or field names that we put, like vendor city and vendor state. So
Okay.
every record is counting those two things.
No, it just counts the records. It groups them by city and state. So where the city and the state are equal, that is a group of records. And then it says count everything, just count it. If it's there, count it. So that's the count asterisk. Now, if I were to change that slightly, and let's see what could I have? No, vendor phone. So if I said count vendor phone, okay, I'm going to get a different values because the Library of Congress, the Washington D.C. I have a few Washington D.C. But if I said, so we'll see how many they were. But if I say count vendor phone, here's one that does not have a vendor phone. Okay, so that's going to change the. Let's see, Washington D.C. is down here at the bottom. Okay, Washington D.C., I have 3 of them. But if I change this, instead of count asterisk, if I change this to say count vendor phone, right, and run this, it's going to change that one in D.C. I believe that'll change to a 2. See, D.C. changed to 2 because one of them did not have a telephone. So it's better. Are you interested in counting a specific piece of that record? Right. So here I only want the count of the vendor phones. But a minute ago, when I had it like this, I want to count every record. I don't want you to have to go in there and look for it. So I'm going to say, instead of saying count vendor ID, I'm going to say count asterisk. And then that lets me I'm just saying to count everything. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Group by is here. Here's group by city and state. The same example here. Okay, the having. Usually when I think of the having, I think of group by and having appearing on the same line. Many books will put it on a separate line. Some will indent it under it. So some say group by having. The having always comes right after the group by. And so you cannot have a having clause without having a group by clause. Therefore, I tend to think of it as being a part of the group by. And so think of the having as a where that applies to the group. For example, this one says select the vendor. Let's pull this one over and take a look at him. Okay, select vendor ID, average invoice total, count of something. Let's see what all we've got up here. I'll go ahead and break this back. So I got the count, I got the vendor ID, the average, and the count. So I've got at least one aggregate function, and I've got something that's not an aggregate function. Therefore, I have to have a group by. I must group by vendor ID, no choices. And notice that this one has the where clause in it. So there's a where in this one where the invoice total is greater than 10. So I'm only going to average invoice totals that are greater than 10. You know, I can have a whole bunch of invoice totals, but 0 or anything, but I'm only going to consider them for the average if they're greater than 10. So it's going to go down through this and pick out all of these guys, and then it will group them. Okay, how many of them do I have? So group by vendor ID, having count greater than 1. So I want to see, so this applies to the where clause, applies to the particular record. Each record has an invoice total. Each time it checks every record, is that greater than 10? If it's greater than 10, it's in the output set. If it's not, it's out of the output set.
So it's going in the count.
What's that?
It is going in the count.
No, it won't go in the count because it's just not considered. It's the where. Remember, we do the from clause gets executed first, then the where clause, and we don't count until we get up to the select clause. So it's it figures out what tables does it need. Then it figures out what rows from the tables it needs. So if the invoice total is less than or equal to 10, it is just not in our world. This query doesn't apply to it.
So it's not counting anything then?
Well, you won't count it if it's less than or equal to 10.
Okay.
If it's greater than 10, you will count it.
Okay.
So this applies to each individual row. Now the having applies to each individual group. That's the difference. Where applies to the row, having applies to the group. So having count greater than 1 is something that group has. I can't say where the count is greater than 1. That doesn't make any sense because that would be trying to apply an aggregate. I can't have an aggregate on the where line. It's got to go on the having line. I can't say having invoice total greater than 10 because having applies to a group and I'm asking about one particular record. So this particular one, and here we have in all its glory the full form of the select from where query. We're pretty much done with it. And I can see what the count is. The count, I'm from invoices, so I have 44 invoices for vendor ID 123, whoever that is. I have 44 invoices where the invoice total is greater than 10, assumably dollars. And group by having count greater than 1. I do not see any counts in here that are 1 or 0. Didn't see any zeros. Questions?
No.
Okay, now that's the group by and the having. Let's see if I've forgotten anything. And the order by was introduced in this one. The order by comes last. So this is the sequence of them. Select from where, giving this its name, the select from where query, or also known as the SFW query. This is the query that gives us back the information. So select from where. The where applies to each individual line. The group by, if I have an aggregate function, then anything that is not in the aggregate function has to appear as a group by. I'm not sure what would happen. I'm curious what would happen. I'm curious what would happen if I didn't have that vendor ID in the output. I'm just curious. I don't know what's going to happen here. and it worked. So it let me group by the vendor ID, even though the vendor ID was not in the output of, was not in the select line. So that's, I thought it probably would, but I wasn't sure that it would. Typically, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't give me much usable information, but.
Just a question.
Go ahead.
Now, since the vendor IDs were numbers.
I believe they are, yes. They don't have to be, but they are numbers.
Okay, it is numbers. So supposing we in the where clause, we said vendor ID greater than 120.
Vendor ID greater than what?
120, 120.
Well, then you would only consider vendor IDs greater than 120. That there would be nothing logically wrong with that query.
Okay, so it will average only those.
Only greater than 120. I don't know what vendor IDs are greater than 120.
Okay.
Vendor ID, do I have any? Yeah. I do. So yeah, you could say that. You would only I guess you said greater than or equal.
Yeah. Okay.
That would mean that you would only consider those 1, 2, 3, 4 records right there, and so you would get 1, 2, 3. You get 4 groups. The average would be the. This is the. No, I'm looking at the vendors table. Sorry, my bad. Well, we are looking at the vendors table. Yeah, it'd be fine if you said vendor ID greater than, if you said where vendor ID is greater than 120.
Yeah.
Vendor ID is greater than 120. I'm expecting to see 4 group. Well, if I can type. I'm expecting to see 4 groups. Each, and I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to get rid of this having. I won't see anything, and the reason I won't see it is when I run this, okay. Well, I guess I see 123, 121, 122, and I guess 120 doesn't have any. Only has like one vendor, one.
But it's greater than 120, so it doesn't include 120.
Well, he probably got filtered out on this having, I expect, is where he went, because I think I'm going to see him now when I take that having off of it. I think I'm going to see. Well, 999. I think this one's invalid, 999, but he has count of 1. But he's still greater than 120. So he would be in this group right here. I don't know where I'm. Oh, well.
I think I understand it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do. Questions? Mr. Kasuka, you're here, or somebody, who else here? Mr. Kasuka, do you have anything? Are you on the video? Are you on audio? I guess not. That's okay. You don't have to have a microphone to participate. Well, that's pretty much where we're at. I don't think I'm going to start into the next module tonight. I will do that on Thursday night, and the next module gets a little trickier than this one. So this module 7 is actually pretty easy. Basically, if you just remember that rule of you have to, if you have an aggregate function, then anything that you're outputting that is not in an aggregate function has to go in a group by. That's the rule that holds on all database platforms. This is not about SQL Server. This is about SQL. And if you work in Access, it's going to be exactly the same way. Access is just, you do it with a graphical user interface, but as soon as you put in that you want count of something, then the rest of them automatically become group by in your queries as you're doing it there. I can't say I like it a whole lot. Okay, let me look at the okay, topic of this discussion. This is not a graded discussion, so you're welcome to participate in it. And let's see, here's the quiz. This is just a little, I have to put the quizzes in there. Okay, here's the assignment. This is the one that I'm most interested in.
Yeah, in this assignment, look at number 4.
Okay. Number 4, let's want to take a look at number 4. Write a select statement that returns 3 columns: account description, line item count, and line item sum. Line item count is the number of entries.
No, I'm sorry, I meant the 5.
Well, let's get number 4 is the we got to build on number 4 to get number 5.
Yeah, I did get number 4 exactly what you got the output.
Okay. Well, let's just see. Let's see how we're going to get it here. Line item sum, account description, sum. Okay. Let's just go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and run that one.
One question there.
Go ahead.
You have the asterisk on the count.
Asterisk.
On the count in the further down. Yeah, no, in your text.
Here?
I found this one to be challenging, inner join. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, you had a count asterisk. So what I did, instead of asterisk, I counted the line count sum or something.
Oh, well, I think if you count asterisk, I think it'll do the same thing.
Okay, it did the same thing. So I put it.
Yeah. Well, I would use if you can use. The question is, are you really interested in counting that line item count, whatever it is? If that were null, would it change what you wanted to count?
Okay.
So, for example, I want to count my students. So I go through 1, 2, 3 little students. But maybe I should. What if I went through and I counted the students' phone numbers? But maybe a student doesn't have a phone number. That student wouldn't get counted.
Okay.
Okay. So that's why. But if I said count star, that would count everybody.
Okay, I was counting line count because I thought if there is a line count, there will be a amount. Otherwise, that line won't be there.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to have a count greater than 1. So I'm interested in getting it greater than 1 because number of entries include only groups with line item count greater than 1.
Okay.
This came out of the textbook, but let me just run this one right quick. Let's see if I can do it. I'm sure I have on occasion, but paste this and let's see. Put this out of the way. Select. Count. As line item count. And what is the sum? What am I summing here? Line item sum. Take out the sum of the invoice line item amount. Okay, so this one I'm going to have to say sum him.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, well, that's pretty straightforward.
Sir, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I hear you. Who's
Okay,
this?
great.
Mr.
This is
Kazuka?
Kazoka.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Now, is any time that if there's something going on, notice that down in the, let's see if you in your there, I don't think you can see it on my screen, but there is a mute button where you can turn off your microphone. For example, if you want to eat a sandwich or something, or you can turn off your microphone. There's a mute button. And then nobody will hear you. So sometimes parents have children or stuff. That happens. I don't know how. Okay, so let me back up to this one. Let's see. So this has to come from what this one is joining. So we have to join the on the account number. So we're going to join the GL accounts and the invoice line items. That will be an inner join. Usually tab on. And what is that? That's on the account number, I believe. Mm-hmm. And some people aren't using the as, but the on a dot equals I. Okay. And this should run. And so I usually like to check it as soon as I get something. Let's see. Oh, yes. Why won't it run? Group by?
Yeah.
Account description. As soon as I put that group by account description in there, it should run. So I'm just going to test it now to see if it's running. I'm not going to worry about it. So I'm getting some output and then having now I am going to use the count asterisk here because that's all I'm really interested in is just the count of anything. The count asterisk of greater than 1, and this should finish up my query right here. And there we have it. I have 10 rows. Is that what you got, Byman?
Yeah, I got 10 rows too, I think.
Okay.
But the next one, okay, that is before I go. Here, if I put in place of the asterisk, invoice line item amount.
Hang on. Well, they all have one, so they should all be the same.
Yeah. Okay.
But the count asterisk will be a better running query.
Okay. Now my confusion is with number 5.
Okay, let's go look at number 5. Number 5 has an issue, and how do we know that there are with an identical account description? Right. So, in other words, if the account description what would stop me from having the same account description? Now, this is book printing costs. How do I know?
Okay, it is on account equal. That is what is separating them. Even if you have multiple descriptions, it doesn't fall under that invoice line item.
Yes, but that's still going to try to group together. So if I have two of them in there named freight, for example, I might have another account description named freight. And in the GL accounts table, now that would be bad if I did. But what's happening here is I'm selecting it, and the way you get around that some line item count is you would group by, I'm going to have to group by account description, but what I would do is, let's see, that is in, I would go over here and look at the, excuse me, where is my, okay, view, Object Explorer. So I'm interested in the GL accounts, terms, invoices. Okay, so the account number is the primary key. That cannot be the same, but there's nothing that's keeping this account description from not being the same. So if I were to change that, what I would do is I would group by, I have to group by the account description, but I would group by account description, comma, I would just add, I would add the account number. Okay, so I would have to, the way I would fix that would be, I would add a group by account description, and I'm going to drop down one, and let's see, that would be the A dot. I have to have a comma in there. Got a group. Let's see. Let me get back to this.
But you wanted, before you could do that, you wanted to insert a record with a different ID and same description.
No, I don't have. I could do that.
I thought that is what you suggested in the question.
Well, I could do that. I could do that. I mean, there's nothing stopping me from doing that. But I'm just saying that to fix that issue, what I would do is I would group by, I would put the account number in the group by, the GLA account, so that's A account number. Now, if I do that, and I could test it, I should get exactly the same 10 rows. If I were to go and put another one in, so let's go back over here, and I'll go to my Object Explorer, and I'll go into here and edit him. Okay, so 100 cash. I could insert a I could insert something else. So these are all so I could insert something that was the same. So freight, for example, I could insert 554 freight here. And, but the thing of it is that he's not going to come out in the query, because remember, the query is,
greater than one.
The count has to be greater than one of the invoices that have it. The invoice line items has to be greater than one.
If we drop it?
Drop what?
Drop that greater than one?
Yeah, you could. You could drop the having, and then you could test it by putting one in there. That will work, though. If you group by the account description, you're pretty sure that the account description is unique. But the account number is guaranteed to be unique.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the fix for that.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to get across.
Okay, so now I understand that problem.
Number 7 is not, module 7 is not real difficult.
But number 6, I couldn't do that one.
Well, let's look at number 6. To filter for invoices with. It's easy. That's easy.
No, no,
It's
no,
just that's just
no.
number.
I'm sorry. Number seven. Number seven.
Well, okay. Number
Sorry.
6. Write a select there are 4 columns: vendor name, account description, line item count, and row count. My question is, what do they mean? Well, I have this question here. We're going to sort it by vendor name. So the book says sort by vendor, but I'm not sure what do they mean sort by vendor. I'm going to get some people sorting by vendor ID, some by name. So I'm going to say, okay, it's going to be sorted by vendor name. There's no real reason. There's no reason I do it one way or the other. So it's 4 columns. So vendor name, account description. So where does vendor name come from? That's the vendors table. Where does the account description come from? That's the GL global ledger accounts.
Mhm.
Line item count from the line items. Line item sum. Okay, what tables do we need here? We need the vendors table. We're going to need the invoices table because we have to go through the invoices table to get through the line items.
Mhm.
So we need the vendors, the invoices, and the GL accounts. Vendors, invoices, invoice line items, and GL accounts.
So I got muddled up with the group by.
Well, basically, once you get all those tables in there, now you are going to, what do you group by? Well, you have the vendor name. You have the account description. You have the line item count. No, you have 2 things there. So you have two fields, a vendor name, account description, that are just come straight from the join.
Okay.
So think of the table join as you're just creating one big table for yourself. When you put that join in there, you just every field that you're trying to output has to be in that table join. So
Okay.
I can't grab something out of the vendors table unless I have the vendors table in the join.
Okay.
So once I get the tables all working, just put them all in the join. Now I put in my aggregate functions. Anything that is not in an aggregate function has to be a group by. I see 2 of them. It has to group by vendor name and by account description.
Okay.
You got 4 tables in the inner join. I don't know. It's just not that difficult.
Okay. All right. Okay. Notice that.
Yeah, it's just you build an inner join on 4 tables, and that's going to be vendors, invoices, invoice line items, and GL accounts. Follow your foreign keys. I mean, that gets a little messy, but it's first do that. First do that, then get that running. Don't put in any aggregate functions until you get that join running.
I have a question when you get a chance.
Okay. And anyway, just a minute. Let me finish this. Then add it. Then paint in the rest of it. So you're going to have two fields in your group by. Okay, Mr. Kasuka, go ahead.
So, in your earlier example, in just when you were trying to let us understand how the count or the aggregate functions work in general, in your earlier example, you didn't group by anything, but you still retained some.
Well, in the first example,
right?
let me go to the example. This example. Okay.
Yeah, there.
Okay, here's the first one. Now, I did not group by. I did not have to group by. The reason I didn't have to group by, I did not trigger the group by rule until I got down here. And now I have a select something that is not an aggregate and something that is. This is where I trigger the group by rule right here. This triggers it. Now, I could have had a group by up here, but it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to group by something. For example, let's see. It says look at the value of the A field and count it. So if I were to execute this, notice that when A is 1, I have 3 records. Is that so? I can go up and check. When A is 1, when A is 1, I have 3 records. When A is 2, I have 2 records. Okay. Now, it would not make much sense to say group by here, although I could. I could say that, and it would work okay, but look at the output that I get. When I do it, I get 3 and 2. Well, how do I know what the 3 is? I don't know what that is. Well, actually, it's when they're grouped that way, and the 2 is this group. But there's nothing. I don't ever see that output, so it doesn't make any sense to do it. Now, as soon as I pick up 2 of them, as soon as I pick up the aggregate function and something that is not aggregated, now I trigger the rule. I must have everything that is not aggregated must be part of the group by. That's an important question.
Yes, got it.
Okay.
All right.
Something a little different. Is it possible to get a solution of the test?
Solution of the test.
Because 2 questions, the language, I didn't even understand what you were wanting us to do. So I just couldn't even.
I'm going to go ahead and discontinue the recording right now. It's 7:11, 11 minutes after 7. I don't think I'm going to publish a solution to the test. If you look at it, it's pretty close to that practice test, I believe.
Or can I ask a question?
I suppose you can ask a question about the test, yes.
Actually, I don't have the test in front of me. Can
Okay.
I send you an email with the?
Of course, I'd rather take the test questions on email. That can use the Canvas email will be fine.
Okay, okay. Also, I have that 6 not graded yet. You haven't looked at it, right?
I believe I have graded 6. I'm pretty
Assignment?
sure I have. I'm not going to pull up grades right now
Okay.
because I have my screen shared and I'll be broadcasting them to the world.
Okay.
I can check. I thought I had graded everything except 7. I think I've graded 6. Check your.
I did, and there wasn't anything. It was not graded. Maybe
When did you submit?
it was probably a day or 2 late.
Okay, I'll go look again. I don't know. I'll look again and I'll get back to you on the Canvas email.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
So we are going to have another lecture on Thursday, right?
We will have lecture on Thursday, and if you're out of town or something, and this says everybody, if you're out of town, by all means, or something comes up, but it is important that you follow along with these lectures, and it's better if you follow along in person, live. But if you can't do that, then at least get the recording. And I try to keep them to an hour, so this one's running an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm going to cut this one off.
Okay. Good night.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm ending the recording now. Ending the recording does not cut off the conversation. Let's see. More.